Okay, hello everyone. So this is the group 6 and we are going to discuss our assigned topic, which is learning with difficulty seeing. But before we begin, let us first know our learning objectives. First is we have to define learners' difficulty seeing. Next, to identify the causes of visual impairments. To determine the role of the teachers to visually impaired students. To distinguish the challenges faced by learners with visual impairment. And lastly, to describe the tools and equipments used for teaching visually impaired students. Okay, so meet your teacher, Hannah. So I'm going to discuss with you the learners with difficulty seeing. Okay, so let us first recognize that in a classroom, students are diverse, right? So as future teacher, let us all expect that students in the classroom will exhibit different levels of clarity of seeing or visual acuity. So there may be some students who will experience low vision that we are going to discuss few minutes from now. Okay, so by definition, learners with difficulty seeing are those with issues regarding sight that interfere with academics. So in other words, there are visually impaired students. That is why in the next discussion, we will be discussing the tools that teachers need to incorporate in a class to address such problem when it comes to sight that may interfere with their academic performance. So when we say learners with difficulty seeing, it is a term that includes both partial sight and complete blindness. Okay, so to know the types of visual impairment, we have here the partially sighted. Okay, so when we say partially sighted, it refers to a person that has partial vision either in one or both eyes. So when we see a partially sighted person, a student, for example, with vision loss may experience eye strain when reading materials or reading books, and those students may have inability to read certain print. So those students may see the font size or colors different from those normal students with normal eyesight. Okay, so next we have the low vision. Okay, so when we say low vision, it is a severe visual impairment in which visual acuity is 20/70 or poorer in the better seeing eye and cannot improve with glasses or contacts. Okay, so low vision is moderate compared to the partially sighted, which is mild. So when a person is in the category of low vision, so they are not eligible to drive because they may have difficulty recognizing faces across the street. That is why when you see people with eyeglasses and you are not recognized, chances are they have difficulty recognizing faces. So other individuals experience watching television or choosing clean and stained or coordinated things that they find it very difficult to do. So for some students with low vision, they find it hard to recognize written materials and they think that it's too small to read and small objects are difficult to see. So some of them with low vision, it cannot improve with glasses or contact lenses. So going next to our type of visual impairment, the legally blind. So when we say legally blind individual, this level of eyesight deficiency is 120 over 200 vision in one or both eyes, or worse, even with the help of corrective lenses. So for a student who is legally blind may require the use of a cane to walk safely around the campus and yet be able to use his or her central vision to read normal size print. Okay, so these are the characteristics of a legally blind individual. And lastly, we have the totally blind. Okay, so totally blind, it refers to a complete loss of sight. So basically, students who are totally blind, they really require braille and talking compasses to provide navigational assistance who are visually impaired. So whenever they learn Okay, next we have here the totally blind. Okay, so when we say totally blind, it refers to a complete loss of sight. So basically, total blindness describes people who cannot really see, they don't see any light at all. Okay, so they needed braille and talking compasses to provide navigational assistance whenever they learned or whenever they do things like the common people usually do. So they really need assistance from the teacher and from the parents as well. Okay, so that's for the types of visually impaired individual. Next, according to Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or IDEA, an impairment in vision that even with correction adversely affects a child's educational performance. So these students may need eyeglasses or optical devices in order to do things that also the normal students are doing. So that's it for the definition of learners with difficulty seeing. Now, to know about the causes, may call on Gio.
Hey everyone, my name is Rex Aldrin, and at this moment, let us discuss how to teach a blind or visual impaired student. Number one thing we should do is to explain any visuals. When teaching a visually impaired or blind student, it is important to clearly explain all visual materials. For example, if you are showing a picture to illustrate a point, you should describe the image. You could say something like, I have put a picture of Queen Elizabeth I or Jose Rizal on the board to illustrate the way she was depicted. She is wearing a large gown with a lot of detailed embroidery. This demonstrates her wealth and power. So we should explain any visuals to visually impaired or blind students. Number two, always give oral instructions. Visually impaired or blind students in your class may have difficulty seeing words and learning what is expected. Instead, you should always give oral instructions for every assignment and activity. Ask students to clap to ask questions. Now, this is a very crucial way in order to make them engage in your lessons. As we all know, it is very traditional for students to raise their hands now if they want to speak during a lesson. Visually impaired or blind students may not notice when their peers raise their hands. Instead, we should replace visual cues with audio cues. For example, you could have students clap twice if they want to ask a question. Number 4, provide tactile learning experiences. When you are teaching a class with visually impaired or blind students, you should try and incorporate tactile learning experiences whenever possible. For example, instead of talking about rocks and showing images of different types of rocks, you should actually have physical rocks available in the classroom for the students to touch and handle. Now, this can also be done with different foods, shells, properties of matters, etc. This will allow your students to explore and learn without relying solely on their sight or their eyes. Number 5, address all students by name. Students who are visually impaired or blind may not always know who is talking. As a result, you should always address students by their name when you call them to answer a questions or or you want to clarify something. This way, the students who is visually impaired can learn to identify their peers based on the sound of their voice. So they are solely relying on their hearing. Next, give them additional time to complete their work. In some instances, visually impaired or blind students may need extra time to complete their assignments and tests. This is typically because reading Braille or using some form of technological aid can take additional time, especially if the student is a beginner in that field. We should always set deadlines and make sure they stick to them, but always add extra time to complete their work. Number 7, treat all of your students equally. Even though you will need to make certain modifications for your teaching style to accommodate the students, we should still hold these students to the same standard as the rest of the peers. For example, all the classroom rules and behavioral expectations should apply to all of the students in the class. We should avoid giving special treatment to any of them. Number 8, consider the curriculum. So, when you are teaching visually impaired or blind students, you may need to modify the curriculum and the way you teach the curriculum in order to meet the students' needs. For example, in PE, when teaching art, you will want to rely more on tactile experiences. Instead of drawing or coloring, which we solely rely on our eyes or visuals, we should try sculpting and working with clay or molding. In this way, the students with visually impaired disabilities can rely more on their sense of touch rather than their sense of visuals. Now, as a teacher or as future educators, your main priority is ensuring that all of your students have an equal opportunity to access learning materials and succeed in your course. To teach visually impaired or blind students, you should modify your teaching strategy, allow for the use of visual aids and assistive technology, and create a safe learning environment. My name is Rex Aldrin, and I hope you have learned something in this discussion. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Riza Maypidoche and I was tasked to discuss the topic about the challenges faced by the students who are visually impaired. And I am also going to introduce to you the different tools and equipments or the different assistive devices that are used in teaching students who have the difficulty in seeing. So let us talk first the challenges or the struggles being experienced or faced by those students who are visually impaired. So I have here the first challenge. So the first challenge is the language challenge of visually impaired students. So according to what I have searched in the internet, there is a lack of material in the area of second language acquisition for visually impaired learners, possibly due to the well-known assumption that students with visual impairment follow the same path of learning as the sighted students. So the students who are visually impaired will experience difficulty in learning new knowledge if they are not being supported with the different materials, tools, and equipments that can truly help them learn something better or learn the language better. So language is not just about speaking it, it's also about writing it. And it is very hard for the students with visual impairment to express their opinions, their feelings through the use of that new language, of that second language by writing. So they would not know how to express the second language they learned through writing. It is hard for them. So there is a big difference between sighted students and students with difficulty seeing when it comes to learning language through writing it. So students with difficulty seeing must be supported with the materials, different materials to be used or tools to be used in using and in learning second language. So the next one The next challenge is the lack of resources and poor participation of parents. The visually impaired students who belong to deprived, marginalized, and socio-economically backward sections of the society usually are not able to make provision of resources and materials for themselves as they do not have a proper source of income. So as what I have observed, most of the students who are visually impaired that belong to poor families are not being sent to school. No? We cannot deny the fact that most of the people think that if you are blind, you cannot achieve something. And that's very saddening. So most of the parents belonging to this kind of communities are not usually educated, and they do not possess the skills and abilities to enhance the learning and the academic or the education of their impaired child. So if they do not have the proper source of income, of course, they cannot also provide for the assistive devices for the materials to be used in order to improve the learning of their children. So it is difficult for them to impart knowledge and learning to their impaired child when they do not have the resources. So with that, the parents might lose interest or motivation to send their impaired children to school or to teach their impaired child because they do not have any means of resources or any tools to assist their child. So another challenge, we have the reading and the writing challenges. So the reading and writing skills are the skills that involve the use of visual abilities to acquire them. Students with visual impairment experience many challenges in learning these skills. They read slower than their sighted peers as they usually categorize words at a letter level instead of a complete word level, which makes them pause frequently while reading. So reading and writing requires visualization. Those students who have the difficulty in seeing really struggles in writing and reading. It is not easy for those blind students to read and write. It would take a lot of time for them to read because they need to feel the pattern or the dots in the braille and take note that it is not in word level. It is letter by letter. So it is really hard for them to read something fast. So imagine the memorization of those different patterns in the braille. It would really take a lot of time, both reading and writing. So the last one is the lack of knowledge. So in visually impaired students, the knowledge regarding various concepts and areas is usually limited. It's really not easy for the students who are visually impaired to acquire knowledge, especially if they are not being supported with the different assistive devices. The knowledge of the students who are visually impaired is very limited, especially if they were not given the opportunity to attend school. So due to the lack of knowledge, students who are visually impaired will experience difficulties and problems in improving their academic pursuit. So those are the 4 challenges experienced by the students who are visually impaired. The first one is language challenge. The second one is lack of resources and poor participation of parents. And the third one is reading and writing challenges. And the last one is the lack of knowledge. So those are the 4 challenges being experienced by students who have the difficulty in seeing. Now let's move on to the tools and equipments needed for learners with difficulty seeing. So these are the assistive devices of those students who are visually impaired. So we have here, for the blind, the Braille is invented by Braille Louise, and it is a tactile system that allows blind and partially sighted people to access literacy by reading and writing. Braille is read by touch by using the pads of the fingers to feel the letters and symbols. So just like what we can see in the picture presented, there are bumps or dots or patterns in which fingers are feeling it. So this is Braille. So there are different kinds of Braille. We have Braille writer, Braille stylus, Braille books, Braille watch, Braille ruler and tape measure, Braille calculator, and Braille paper. So I have here pictures of these. So the first one here is Braille writer. So it might be equated to typewriter, in which it has 6 keys and has space bar. So those 6 keys can form letters, contractions, and symbols used in Braille. So the second one, we have the Braille stylus. Braille stylus and slate also. Braille stylus and slate. Just like a pen and pencil being designed to place a visible mark on a piece of paper, the Braille stylus and slate is designed to punch or emboss raised tactile dots and bumps into a piece of paper. How to use the Braille stylus and slate. So this is the slate. Ano na siya katakob-takob. And this is the paper to be used in writing. So imo ning ipa-center, pasud ang papel between the slate and the stylus. Nani mga patterns dire sa slate ug mao to ang murahag pattern or guide kung unsang imong tudlokon ito. So that is Braille stylus. Next one is Braille books. So these are books that has Braille katong mga dots sa Brailles niya na naon to touch to sa blind students. Ang tibuok books na ay mga dots and patterns mo to hikap-hikapon sa mga students as they read. So we also have Braille watch. So as we can see, naputo yung mga patterns and dots and watch. Umoro to hikapon sa mga students. We also have Braille ruler. The same with the Braille watch. Nagasa sila hikap-hikapon yung mga patterns and dots. At the same time, ang Braille calculator. So these are different kinds of Braille. So now let's go to the low vision students. So these low vision students, these are the students na makakita pero hanap ang ilang pananaw. So these are the materials to be used or the tools to be used if you are a low vision students. So the first one is the large print books. So this book is different from the normal books. So the font here is bigger than the standard font of the normal books. So we also have here large print writer. So the paper in this typewriter, the font are bigger also, and the font in the keys are also bigger. So kana maklaro jud sa mga students. We also have the magnifying glass. So I guess every one of us are familiar of what is magnifying lenses. So the eyeglasses or the reading glasses can be considered as the magnifying lenses. The these are the glasses, the glasses that could help the low vision students to read better or to see more clearer. So we also have here the grade 1 lined paper. This will guide the low vision students to write straightly. Kanang dili mag lapas-lapas ang ilang kuan, dili maghiwi-hiwi ang ilahang sinuwatan. So we also have another tools and equipments used. Wala na ko napil sa presentations. So we have talking book. We also have tape recorder. And we also have computer with synthesizer. So the talking book contains sound recording of someone reading a book. A tape recorder is recording sounds of magnetic tape and later reproducing them. And we also have computer with synthesizer. So maunang computer nga whatever you write, mutingog sad siya. So for example, if you type hello, may computer og hello. So those are the different tools and equipments or different assistive devices used in teaching students with visual impairment. So that's all for me, and thank you so much for listening.
Hello everyone, this is teacher Geraldine, and now that we already have tackled the causes, the challenges, and the role of teachers in the lives of people with disabilities in seeing, let us look into the lives of some notable people and how did they become successful despite their visual impairments? First, we have Louis Braille. I guess his surname is already familiar to us, right? He was born on January 4, 1809 to January 6, 1852. Louis Braille is a French educator and inventor of a reading and writing system for use by people who are visually impaired. It was known as the Braille system. Louis Braille became blind at the age of 3 because of an accident. He was playing at his father's harness shop and a tool slipped and got into his right eye. A local physician bound and patched the affected eye and even arranged for Braille to meet a surgeon in Paris. However, no treatment could save the damaged organ because of the absence of resources and facilities for the blind that time. And consequently, an infection set in and spread to both eyes. This was called the sympathetic ophthalmia. It is a rare inflammatory condition that affects both eyes. It usually occurs following a penetrating injury to one eye resulting from a trauma or surgery. Because of his young age, Braille did not realize at first that he had lost his sight, and he often asked his parents why it was always dark. And it was very devastating for his parents seeing their child having suffered from because of blindness. However, Louis' parents wanted him to obtain an education and enrolled their son at the school in their village, where Louis learned by listening. And because of his combination of intelligence and diligence, Braille became one of the scholars of the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris. He was able to go to this Institute for the Blind, and there Braille read the Hauy books by the school's founder, Valentin Hauy. Valentin Hauy, not blind himself, however, he was a philanthropist who devoted his life to helping the blind. He designed and manufactured a small library of books for the children using a technique of embossing heavy paper with the raised imprints of Latin letters. Readers would trace their fingers over the text and comprehending it slowly. And because of this material, Braille was helped by the Hauy books. However, he also despaired over the lack of depth, and the amount of information retained in such books was necessarily minor. However, he proved to be a highly proficient student, and after he had exhausted the school's curriculum, he was immediately asked to remain as a teacher's aide, and by 1833, he was elevated to a full professorship. For much of the rest of his life, Braille stayed at the institute where he taught history, geometry, and algebra. What are the achievements of Louis Braille? First, the maximized communication system. While there at the institute, students were visited by French Army officer Charles Barbier, who introduced the students to a 12-dot cryptography system he created for soldiers to use for nighttime communication in the battlefield. His system was comprised of different combinations of 12 raised dots to represent different symbols. His writing suggested that he hoped the system could be used by people with visual and hearing impairments and anyone who was unable to obtain a formal education. Louis Braille innovated by simplifying its form and maximizing its efficiency. In 1824, he completely developed a 6-dot cell system so that the blind could use a single index finger to feel and read. And the system was first published in 1829, and a more complete elaboration appeared in 1837. And this is the Braille system. As we can see, each letter of the alphabet has corresponding dot symbol from A to Z. It was a tactile reading and writing system of 64 symbols total. Louis Braille also became a notable educator at National Institute for Blind Youth. He continued to work on his education and became an accomplished musician, writer, researcher, inventor, and teacher at the same school he studied. And at the age of 20, he published the first Braille book, The Method of Writing Words, Music, and Playing Songs by Means of Dots for Use by the Blind and Arranged for Them. Next is Miss Helen Keller. She was born on June 27, 1880 and died on June 1, 1968. She was an American author, disability rights advocate, political activist, lecturer, and is one of the most well-known figures of the 20th century, and her life, narrated in her books, The Story of My Life, inspired individuals of her time and future generations of those with disabilities to live with their lives to the fullest. So how did Helen Keller become blind? She became blind and at the same time deaf at the age of 19 months after being in contact with an unknown illness which was believed by the doctors nowadays to be scarlet fever or meningitis. However, Helen Keller developed home signs at the young age in order to communicate with her family despite her conditions. And at the age of 7, her parents consulted on a specialist at the Perkins Institute for the Blind in Boston, and the institute offered Miss Anne Sullivan. Through Anne Sullivan's extraordinary instruction, Helen Keller learned to read, write, and communicate with other people around her. Keller learned from Sullivan to read and write in Braille system and to use hand signals of the deaf and mute, which could understand only by touch. And eventually, Keller's interest to learn grew, and from that point, she flourished her education. She went on to acquire excellent education, and she became the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. She also became a great speaker and author, advocate of people with disabilities, political activist, suffragette, pacifist, radical socialist, and supporter of birth control. Helen Keller altered the world's perception of the capacities of the handicapped, and because of her courage, intelligence, and dedication to serve the people, she was one of the recipients of the highest civilian honor of the United States, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And according to Miss Helen Keller, the most pathetic person in the world is someone who has sight but no vision. These two persons had no sight, but they had visions in life, and through dedication and perseverance despite the challenges they have faced, they achieved their visions in life and advocate for the handicapped and help the people with visual impairments. With this, it is more important for us to be visionary in life and strive for success, because life is not worth living if we don't have purpose, visions, and ambitions for ourselves and for the people around us. And that's all for the presentation. This is Group 2. Thank you and God bless everyone.